Hey, there we go. Just a heads up, you're being recorded. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Dr. Galena Rhoades, who's a research professor and the director of the Institute for Relationship Science at the University of Denver and a practicing clinical psychologist. Dr. Rhoades' research program focuses on romantic relationship formation and predictors of relationship success, as well as studies the effectiveness of couple intervention programs, which she has over 130 publications in those areas. Please welcome Dr. Galena Rhoades.
Thank you. I have to say this is my latest presentation ever coming from University of Denver. It's an hour later for me. And I think the most fun. I've never gotten a chance to present after a movie, especially as one as great as Better Off Dead. That was a real treat. So thank you for having me today. Thank you to Chapman University for making this happen. As Alita said, I'm from the University of Denver, and I'm going to share some research with you on breakups and relationship success, I think.
It might be the other button. Or Bobby, do you mind flicking for us? Oh,
there it is. Okay, so many of us know this, but breakups really do hurt. So this research is from a study that was a national sample of people who were 18 to 35 years old. And I wanted to share these really boring statistics with you. I promise I won't make you look at them. But for those of you who ever took a stats class, here you go. This is what it looks like. So what we learned in this study was that as people went through a breakup, they really experienced declines in their mental health and declines in life satisfaction. Breakups really do hurt, and they hurt for a while. And as these numbers show, it actually doesn't really matter if you're dating someone new. Your life satisfaction is a little better than if you aren't dating someone new by the time we ask you about how you're doing, but it doesn't really matter that much. In fact, one of the things that matters most, but in the opposite way you'd think, is how happy you were in your relationship. People who are happier in their relationships tend to adjust better to breakups. Isn't that interesting? It's kind of a surprise because as we saw for Lane, he thought he was really happy in that relationship, but it actually probably wasn't a great one for him. Relationships hurt so much when we break up that there's actually research showing that more for women than men, taking ibuprofen can help you feel better after a breakup, not just Ben and Jerry's. Okay, I got to find this clicker again. There we go. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what we learn from breakups and how important it is that we take time to learn from breakups. So especially when people are younger, here are some of the reasons why I think this is really important. Look at these findings. People who cheated in their last relationship, this is from the same study, are 3 times more likely to cheat in their next relationship. That's kind of scary. I think the next one is worse. If you were cheated on in your last relationship, you're 2 times more likely to be cheated on again in your very next relationship. So one of the reasons I think this research is really important is that we can do better, right? We have to learn from our relationship experiences, because if we don't, we might keep repeating the same errors. So I have some ideas here for what people can do when they go through a breakup, which we saw Lane starting to do a little bit in this movie, right, with Monique, as he was processing what might have happened. But I think that's really important. And what we often see is that people don't do that. We don't take the time to really process what might have happened in our last relationship and think through what we need to do better. A concept that I really like is what we call sliding versus deciding. What we see people doing often is sliding into the same patterns, not really making decisions. And we know in relationships and probably many other areas of life, we will do better when we take in all the information and truly make a decision and move forward without sliding into circumstances that might get us stuck. I think there's one more. is, let me find it. Okay. I also wanted to talk a little bit about relationship success. So one of the things that we know from national research is that there are a number of things that we actually can change that make it more likely that we will have better outcomes in our marriages. And relationships really matter early on. So what Lane's experiencing in this movie really is important because it's setting the stage for what he might experience in future relationships going forward. So I wanted to talk through some of these findings from a couple of studies that I and colleagues did with national data sets. So predictors of happier marriages, fewer prior relationship experiences. It's a little bit backwards than how we think about a lot of things, right? We think that having more experience makes us better at something. But actually what we see in marriage is that people who have less experience tend to be happier in their marriages. So we can think through why that might be. But one of the reasons I think is what we talked about with breakups, that if you don't really take the time to process and think through what might have gotten off track, what went wrong, what you brought to the table, then you may wind up repeating those same errors. People who at least didn't know that their partner cheated on them while they were dating before marriage also are happier in their marriages. It's probably not that big of a surprise, but 10% of people who were married in this study knew that their partner had cheated on them before they got married. Kind of interesting. This finding, this seems kind of obvious, but look at this number. 53% of people who went on to get married reported before marriage that there was some physical aggression in their relationship. And they were less happy if that had been the case. But I think this really speaks to something important, right? And we saw some echoes of this happening in this movie, right? Where there's some kind of threatening behavior toward one another in this movie. And I think that's really important to recognize. 53% of people who go on to get married at some point had some physical aggression in their relationships. People who get some premarital education tend to be happier in their marriages. If they go to a workshop, if they read books together, if they do something that teaches them some relationship skills. We also asked people before they were married how committed they were to their relationship and how committed they felt their partner was to their relationship. And people who ever said that they felt they were more committed than their partner was also had less happy marriages. And then we looked at predictors of divorce. Okay, many of us think that it's a good idea to live together before marriage. And you know what we find? We actually find the opposite. People who live together before they have made a commitment to one another, a mutual commitment to be married, whether that's engaged or they've made plans to get married, they tend to have a higher risk for divorce. Now, this is psychology research, so we're talking about tiny differences between people, okay? But they are statistically significant. And what I think is important about these findings is these are all decisions we can make, right? People can make before they get married, when they're dating. These are things that we have control over. And we also ask people about living together. How did you start living together? Now, if you ask somebody, how did you get married? The answer is often something like, well, I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. She was the one. It was the right thing for us. We really made a decision about it. If you ask people, how'd you start living together? You know what the most common answer is? It just sort of happened. We just kind of moved in together, right? My lease was up. It made sense financially. And people often don't recognize what a commitment that is, right? And it doesn't mean it doesn't work out for even most people. But what we do see is that people who said they slid into living together without really making a decision are actually more likely to get a divorce later on. So some ideas that I wanted to share, these come from work by people who are at University of Washington. And the 7 principles of smart love. I have this logo up here for Motherwise. It's a program that I run in Denver at a nonprofit called Thriving Families for Women During Pregnancy and Postpartum. And it's a relationship education program where we talk about things that we can know and decisions we can make in relationships and healthy relationship skills. And I really like these 7 principles of smart love. And I think they're great information, probably for all of us at any stage, but especially for people Lane's age as they're thinking about forming relationships. Seek a good match. Somebody who shares values with you. You don't have to be the same, but having similar values makes for a good match. Choose a real partner, not a makeover project, not somebody who you think, oh, gosh, he'd just be so great if he could just change this one thing, like if he could just stay out of jail, if he could just, you know, maybe stay loyal to me. Don't try to change yourself to be somebody else. You know, we saw Lane trying to do that, right? In this movie, kind of worked out for him actually, but don't try to change yourself to be somebody just for a relationship. Healthy relationships are ones in which you can be yourself and know that you're safe to do that. Expect good communication and don't run from conflict, right? We know that relationships have disagreements. There will be times when we don't agree with one another. And the best thing we can do is learn ways to communicate well through those disagreements. Don't play games, pressure, or manipulate someone. That seems pretty reasonable. And yet, it's something to watch out for in relationships, both for ourselves and maybe in partners. Have a bottom line. Think about really what is most important to you. Some things like physical safety in a relationship, that's a bottom line that everyone deserves in a relationship. But what's most important to you? And make those decisions as you're making decisions about relationships and people you might want to be with. Okay, I wanted to share my contact information up here, and I think we have a little bit of time for questions.
Right, folks, if you have any questions, you can put your hand up and I'll run the mic around. While I was watching your presentation though, Dr. Rhoades, I did have a question. I know you work as a therapist as well. If Elaine was one of your patients, what kind of specific, like concrete advice would you give him as he's describing all the things that he's going through?
Oh, I love that question. Well, I'm not really a psychodynamic or a Freudian psychologist, but part of me would really want to analyze what's going on with his parents. What is going on with his parents? They actually seem like they've probably got a decent marriage, right? Like they seem kind to one another, but wow, that mom, I think she might need more therapy than Lane does. But I think I would want to talk to Lane about what did he learn about Beth, right? What does he want to take with him? What were the good parts of that relationship with her? What does he want to leave behind? Maybe what didn't work. And maybe what did he learn about who she was as he saw her in other contexts, right? We found out that maybe she wasn't really that great of a match for him for a number of reasons. So I think I'd really want to dig in with him and understand what he learned from being in that relationship.
Awesome. Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Yeah. I'm gonna come around. I'll pass the mic to you. Here you go.
You seem to be talking about solid relationships. When you're going from a dating relationship, either one side or the other wants to take it to the next step. And so where do you talk about that type of transitioning and I guess standing your ground when one person wants to transition and the other person equally wants to say, well, it's not ready. I mean, the other person is like sort of surprised, not surprised, but say wants to take time saying, well, maybe I'm not ready to take that next step, but doesn't necessarily want to put the other person down and say, no, what do you as therapists say about that type of maybe not conflict, but just maybe the timing is not right for both parties?
Yeah, you know, more and more I've been seeing couples in my practice who aren't married yet and are trying to make those very decisions about whether they want to take it to the next step, whether that's marriage or moving in together or making some other kind of commitment to one another. And for me, I think what's important is understanding and helping the couple, both partners, really talk well about why that difference exists, right? Is it something about the relationship that one of the people is concerned about, right? Is there something that gets in the way of them being ready because they have some doubts about the relationship and there's more they want to learn or work through together? Or does it come from some past experiences potentially, right? And it may be in either direction that it comes from past experiences, whether that's the person who is more committed or less committed. It may be that really comes from another place, and it's not really about how, the kind of the quality of the relationship or how well they do together. So I often find, especially for people who are not kind of in their 20s thinking about partnering in marriage for the first time, I think what we often see is we apply kind of first marriage, first family expectations to marriage and relationships, when actually, when you're a little older, you also get to really chart your own course and decide what works for you. And I think that's one of the things that is important to talk through in relationships is, well, if we kind of let go of society's expectations for us, what really is best for each of you and the two of you. But that distinction to me is really important around, is it something that someone has doubts about in the relationship, or is it more about kind of personal or past experiences?
Thank you.
Your point of someone may be like in a part of a job or just out of another relationship and just say, time, I mean, you may be a great person, but I just need time to, breathe, or I establish my own self. And yes, it's great that you come along, but I'm sort of like stretching my legs on my own. And gee, I don't know who I am at present. And gee, I mean, the statistics of guys getting out of one relationship and getting married in another in 2 years, say, gee, I don't necessarily want to be in that statistic.
And you're nailing it. That's true. Historically, it's been the case that men have married for a second time 2 years on average after a first marriage. And for women, it's about 3 years. And, I often get this question that seems related is, should you take a break after a relationship ends? Do you need some time to think through who you are, kind of stretch your legs, as you said, to think about what your identity is now? And I think oftentimes that's true. And I don't think there's a hard and fast rule about that. I think in some ways people can shy away from relationships, and it's hard to learn about yourself in relationships and what you're like in relationships if you're not trying it out at the same time, right? But I think that's often the case, that it's, again, not really about the relationship and the quality of the relationship, but what someone feels they need to be ready to make that kind of commitment personally.
Thank you. We've got another question.
Yes. The study, is it specifically hetero couples? Did it include, was it more diverse? And if it was, what were they similar, the results, or were they very different? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. One of those studies, the study that's about breakup, is of heterosexual couples in opposite sex relationships, and it's unfortunate that that's the case. And the reason that was the case is that we were looking at predictors of marriage and marriage outcomes at a time when marriage wasn't legal. Thankfully, it is legal today. And so we have some research that's going on now that's kind of looking at some of these same things to know if there are different pressures and different experiences for people who are in same-sex relationships or who are sexual gender minorities. And there is certainly less research And what we know is that oftentimes, you know, the core parts of what make relationships work are very similar across lots of different groups. So I can't say for sure that all of those research findings, and this is true across, you know, lots of parts of science and psychology in particular, would be the same. But my experience is that oftentimes kind of the core components don't look different across different groups, though different groups of people have, you know, different pressures or stressors that they have to work through.
Yeah, great question. Are there any married homosexual people in the room? Just me? Yeah. Maybe a little. Okay, all right. How's your relationship satisfaction? Is good? Nice. Great. And you, ma'am? Yep. I think we have 100%, 100% marriage satisfaction.
I like it. There's a study right here. There's a study.
We're
right
doing
here.
science. Isn't that great? Anyone else? I saw a couple of hands. Let's go here, and then I'll go to you in the front.
Hi. I really liked the thank you, the sliding versus deciding thing that you were mentioning, because I find a lot of times it's easier to think of, oh, here are all the reasons why we shouldn't break up versus here are all the reasons why we should stay together, like sunk costs and, you know, it's been so long, there's an expectation, it'd be a lot easier financially, it's, you know, the right decision. What advice would you give, broad strokes, to like a friend, for example, if you caught them sliding, if you thought that you could identify a way that they potentially weren't seeing in their own relationship, looking at it outside in, to maybe help them navigate that?
Yeah, I think you said that so well, that we look at the reasons not to break up, right? And those are what we call constraints, things that might keep you together even though you don't feel committed or, you know, feel a desire for this relationship to go forward long term. And you know, sometimes those constraints are helpful to us, right? When times are tough in a long-term relationship, it can be those constraints that help us be motivated to work on a relationship. But earlier in relationships, what we see is those constraints can keep somebody in a relationship that's really not a good match for them, or maybe not even healthy. And so my advice in that situation is to gently maybe point that out and ask some of those questions, right? Like, you know, if you weren't living together, do you think you'd stay with them? Would you still be in this relationship? What do you like about the relationship? What parts are hard? If you didn't have these financial entanglements, what would it be like? Would you make a different decision, right? And really help them think through making that distinction between things that might be keeping them in a relationship and things that they really want and look forward to in a relationship.
Thank you. One more question.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It was awesome. I'm just curious, looking at Lane, it looks like he's probably going to start dating a girl from France. What would be your advice to Lane to dating someone from a different country?
Oh, that's a neat question. You know, one of the things that I think this movie also kind of highlights on the side is just that point about dating someone from a different country, from a different cultural background from you. And while, you know, one of the 7 principles of smart love is around finding someone who's a good match, someone who has your same values. And when you date someone who has a different background from you, it's really important to understand where those differences are and communicate about them, right? It doesn't mean that it's not going to work. It works if you're able to communicate through them and make decisions. And in some ways, you get to make more decisions, which is probably a really good thing, right? Because you get to decide, you know, how do we want to handle spending time with friends? Maybe that looks different across the two cultures. What religion do we want to practice together or raise our kids in? I'm seeing a couple in my practice where one of them was raised Jewish and from Brazil, Jewish Brazilian, and the other is a New Yorker, Irish Catholic New Yorker. And, and they have adult children now. And she still identifies as a New Yorker and Irish Catholic, but she decided with her husband that they would raise their children as Jewish and really lean into their Jewish history and culture in the family. And she actually took on really raising the kids as Jewish, even though she identifies still as Catholic. So, it's a neat example where they really made those decisions together and paved their own way for what works for them and their family. But it does take a lot more communication, which is maybe a little bit harder when your partner also doesn't speak English quite as well.
You speak the language of love, though, right?
I know,
As
I love
we've
that.
learned this evening. Language, minor. Last call. This will be the last question for the evening. I'll run up, take the mic away so you don't hear me breathing. There we go.
Yeah, I saw this movie when I was a kid. I think some people in this room might have. And now as like a 50-year-old woman, I'm like, Lane, you got like borderline personality disorder. You need some therapy. And I feel kind of sad for him because it feels like his personality is defined by the people he's with. So how do you think, speculating that he could have success in this marriage with, or this relationship with Monique?
I was thinking about that too. Like when you in the closet scene, right? And he's got all the hangers have her picture and the wall that's devoted to her. And there's something that like feels a little stalkerish about that. That's also movies from the 80s. There are lots of things that we can't do anymore that show up in this movie. It seems like he's building a better relationship with Monique, right? Because they're starting off as friends and they're sharing activities together, and they're working on his car together, right? They're talking about things and building experiences together more than what it means to be dating someone because she's popular. So I think there's some hope that that we can see him, avoiding a long-term personality disorder. But I hear you that there are some parts of that feel like they're a little wrong and headed in the wrong direction for him. And I do hope he gets some therapy and gets a chance to work that out.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Rhoades, and for sticking around for some questions. Big round of applause for Dr. Galena Rhoades, all the way from Denver. Thank you for joining us. That concludes the event this evening. We hope to see you. The final screening for Science on Screen is next month on the 20th of June. We'll be showing The Never-Ending Story. And we have a professor presenting research on the impact of literacy on the childhood brain. It's really, really interesting stuff. So hope to see you for the final installment of Science on Screen next month with The Never-Ending Story. And we'll see you next time at the Frida.